The Art of Being Alone. Lessons from Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher often misunderstood for his provocations, was, above all, a thinker of solitude. His life, marked by illness, exile, and estrangement, was not just a product of suffering, but of conscious separation from the masses. For Nietzsche, being alone was not a tragedy, nor a temporary retreat from the world. It was a necessity for the cultivation of the self. Whosoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. These words are often quoted in a psychological or political context, but their deeper meaning is tied to solitude. To confront the abyss, the void of meaning, the dark truths of existence, requires a person to stand alone, free of distractions, naked to their own thoughts. Nietzsche knew that such isolation is harrowing, but he also knew it is the crucible in which one's individuality is forged. Nietzsche was not a recluse in the romantic sense, retreating into nature for comfort. His solitude was sharper, more deliberate. He walked alone for hours in the Swiss Alps, scribbling notes, letting thoughts bubble without interference. In his letters and notebooks, he frequently emphasized that only in solitude can the thinker hear the whisper of higher truths. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he creates a prophet who leaves society to descend from the mountains and speak to the people. This mythic journey is reversed. The prophet does not ascend to find God, but rather descends to share what he learned in solitude. Zarathustra's mountain is more than a setting. It's a metaphor for the rarefied space required to birth new values. The masses, Nietzsche insisted, could not understand the depth of such thoughts unless they too learned to be alone. He was critical of herd mentality, not out of arrogance, but out of a deep belief that conformity stifles the growth of the individual. The last man, as he called it, is the one who avoids risk, embraces comfort, and never ventures inward. This man is never alone in the meaningful sense. He is always surrounded by others, noise, news, and distraction, and yet he is utterly alienated from himself. To be alone, Nietzsche taught, is not simply to be without others. It is to dwell in the silence necessary to hear one's own inner voice. This voice does not flatter. It wounds, questions, accuses, but from it, the possibility of the Übermensch, the self-overcoming human, emerges. Nietzsche's solitude was not comfortable, nor easy. It was often laced with illness, despair, and existential vertigo. He once wrote, "The greatest events, they are not our loudest, but our stillest hours." In those silent hours, the self confronts its raw nature. Only then can one carve meaning where there is none, create values where there are none given, and shape a life as a work of art. Nietzsche teaches us that being alone is not about withdrawal, but about confrontation. It is not about shutting the world out, but about letting oneself in. The modern world, with its endless feed of opinions, its permanent connection, and its shallow affirmations, fears this silence. But for Nietzsche, this fear is precisely what keeps us from becoming who we truly are. Nietzsche did not merely advocate solitude as a personal preference. He defended it as a philosophical stance, an existential imperative for anyone serious about becoming what he called an individual. He saw most people not as selves, but as masks, echoes of conventional values, recycled opinions, and safe desire. To be alone, in Nietzsche's terms, is to peel away those layers until something original and dangerous stirs beneath. In The Gay Science, he writes, "The greatest weight, What if someday or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness? This is the introduction to the concept of eternal recurrence, one of Nietzsche's most enigmatic and challenging ideas. Imagine, he suggests, that you had to live your exact life over again, eternally. Would you despair, or would you embrace it? This thought experiment only arises in radical solitude, in that loneliest loneliness. Nietzsche frames this inner confrontation as a place where ordinary diversions no longer protect us from ourselves. If you can affirm your life even in that moment, completely, without the need for justification, then you have achieved something extraordinary, the affirmation of life itself, not despite suffering, but because of it. This affirmation requires distance from the values imposed by society, values that Nietzsche often attacked as slave morality, systems of thought that glorify humility, obedience, and meekness, not because these are inherently virtuous, but because they benefit the weak. In contrast, solitude allows the individual to critique inherited beliefs and forge new ones, what Nietzsche calls a revaluation of all values. To do this, one must resist the seductions of the crowd. Nietzsche's warnings about the herd are not elitist sneers, but deep psychological insights. He knew how strong the urge to belong is, how terrifying it is to go against the grain, but he also knew that this instinct keeps us from growing. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he warns, "You crowd together with your neighbors and have a common conscience, and this you call virtue, but I call it herd instinct." Solitude, by contrast, is the space in which you become capable of creating your own conscience. But this is no narcissistic indulgence. It is, in fact, painful. Nietzsche speaks of the loner not as a contented hermit, but as a wanderer, an exile, one who suffers for their independence. He who has not passed through the inferno of his passions has never overcome them, he writes. To walk alone is to endure that inferno, to burn away illusion, comfort, and borrowed ideals. The philosopher, the artist, the truly self-possessed individual is one who dares to confront life on these terms. In our own time, solitude has been pathologized. Loneliness is a condition to be cured, filled with noise, social media, companionship at any cost. But Nietzsche flips this. The problem is not that people are too alone, but that they are never truly alone. They never risk the silence required for deep thought or authentic becoming. Nietzsche's solitude is not escape. It is confrontation, not retreat, but a preparation for return. The thinker climbs the mountain not to hide from the world, but to return with something new to say. That's why his Zarathustra does not stay above the clouds forever. He descends again, bearing new truths, though he knows few will listen. This is the Nietzschean paradox. The stronger you become in solitude, the less the world can understand you, but the less you need it to. Nietzsche was not just a philosopher of logic and argument. He was a deeply lyrical thinker, one whose philosophy often bleeds into poetry. For him, thought was not merely analytical, it was creative. And nowhere is this clearer than in his concept of the artist as a model for human existence. What does this have to do with solitude? Everything. Nietzsche saw the artist, not necessarily the painter or poet, but the creator in the broadest sense, as the ultimate type of human being. The one who does not merely live life, but shapes it. Not one who finds meaning ready-made, but one who must forge it in the absence of divine authority, inherited morality, or collective approval. And such a task can only be done alone. We should consider every day lost on which we have not danced, at least once, he writes in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. This dancing is not literal. It is a metaphor for the act of turning life into rhythm, into grace, into expression. It is the very opposite of passive existence. The artist's solitude, then, is not simply about separation from people. It is about creating a space in which the self becomes fertile ground for new values. Nietzsche's creative solitude is painful, yes, but also vital. Only in isolation can one hear the faint inner voice that says, "This is the way I must go, even if no one understands it." This is why Nietzsche admired figures like Goethe, Beethoven, and even Heraclitus. Individuals who cultivated inner strength through creative self-direction, who were not swayed by public opinion but driven by a deeper vision. He despised conformity not because he valued rebellion for its own sake, but because conformity kills creativity. And without creativity, there is no becoming. In The Birth of Tragedy, his first book, Nietzsche explores the tension between Apollo and Dionysus, two forces that represent respectively order and chaos, form and passion, the rational and the ecstatic. The truly creative individual, he believed, learns to balance both. But this balance is not taught. It is achieved through inner struggle, often in solitude. Nietzsche writes, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." That chaos is not a flaw. It is the raw material of the artist's vision, and it can only be accessed away from the crowd in the silence of self-confrontation. Modern society, Nietzsche might say, encourages comfort but not chaos, efficiency but not intensity. It wants us to be productive but not passionate. It gives us entertainment but not ecstasy. The solitary artist, however, rejects these easy pleasures. They know that beauty is born from conflict and that the most important battles are internal. Nietzsche's solitude was generative. He produced his greatest works during periods of deep isolation, often while battling severe migraines, nausea, and poor vision. He lived frugally, in small rented rooms, disconnected from the academic world he had abandoned. And yet, out of this physical and emotional isolation came books like Beyond Good and Evil, The Gay Science, and Ecce Homo, works that burn with originality and fire. For Nietzsche, solitude is the forge. It is where the soul is tempered, where weakness is exposed and transcended. The solitary artist is not running from life, but running toward it, toward its deepest questions, its unspeakable beauties, its unbearable truths. To be alone is to be an artist of the self. And this, perhaps, is Nietzsche's ultimate lesson. Your life is your canvas. Society may hand you paint-by-number kits, but only in solitude can you throw them aside and start painting something new, something terrifying and luminous, something truly your own. To be alone is not only to be free from others, it is to be exposed to what most people spend their lives avoiding: suffering. Nietzsche was intimately familiar with pain. Throughout his adult life, he endured chronic illness, blinding migraines, digestive ailments, muscular weakness. His solitude was often forced upon him by his condition. But rather than flee from this suffering or wallow in self-pity, Nietzsche transformed it into a philosophical challenge. He refused to ask, "Why do I suffer?" Instead, he asked, "What can suffering create in me?" And the answer, time and again, was depth. For Nietzsche, suffering is not an obstacle to overcome so that we can return to life. It is life. It is the fire through which strength, clarity, and authenticity are forged. In The Gay Science, he writes, "Only great pain is the ultimate liberator of the spirit." I doubt that such pain makes us better, but I know that it makes us more profound. This is the heart of Nietzsche's teaching on amor fati, the love of fate. Not merely accepting your suffering, but embracing it, loving it, seeing it not as a curse, but as a necessary part of your becoming. But such an attitude is impossible without solitude. Why? Because in the company of others, suffering is often diluted, soothed, pitied, medicated, avoided. In solitude, there is no one to save you from your pain. You must sit with it, understand it, find meaning in it, or create that meaning yourself. And in that crucible, Nietzsche believed something new can emerge. He often compared this transformation to alchemy, the turning of base material, suffering, fear, weakness into gold, insight, strength, joy. In Ex Homo, one of his final works, he declares, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." This isn't a cliché when Nietzsche says it. It is a philosophical vow to turn every wound into wisdom. But this is not stoic indifference or cold endurance. Amor fati is active. It's a declaration that every part of your life, every heartbreak, illness, failure is necessary. More than that, it's beautiful. Not because it feels good, but because it pushes you toward wholeness. Nietzsche's solitude was not peaceful. It was often full of darkness. He lost friends. His books were misunderstood. His health collapsed. He was ignored and laughed at during his lifetime, but he never gave in to resentment. That would have been the easy route, what he called resentment, the poisonous bitterness of those who blame the world for their suffering. Instead, he wrote, "I want to learn more and more to see as beautiful what is necessary in things. My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity." Such a view can only be achieved in the long hours of introspection that solitude provides. It cannot be borrowed. It must be built, slowly, painfully, alone. In our culture, we're encouraged to heal as quickly as possible, to move on, to return to normal. Nietzsche would say, no, stay in the wound, explore it, turn it over, let it shape you, let it teach you something no comfort ever could. To be alone, in Nietzsche's vision, is to take full responsibility for your life, not just the pleasurable parts, but the tragic ones. And in doing so, to emerge not just unharmed, but transformed, stronger, stranger, truer. This is the solitude of the philosopher, the artist, the soul on fire. Solitude, for Nietzsche, is not an end in itself. It is a means to transformation, a forging ground for the higher individual. But once this transformation occurs, what then? Here lies one of Nietzsche's greatest challenges. What should the awakened soul do with the world? Once you have crossed the deserts of nihilism, once you've burned away the false comforts and created new values, how do you live among others again? In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the title character begins in solitude. He lives in the mountains for 10 years, meditating, wrestling with truth, discovering the idea of the Übermensch, the one who transcends human limitations. But Zarathustra does not stay on the mountain. He descends. He returns to humanity, bringing with him the insights forged in silence. This return is not triumphant. It is painful. Nietzsche uses the imagery of light and blindness. Zarathustra, having spent so long in the clarity of his solitude, is like a man stepping into darkness when he returns to the crowd. The people do not understand him. They laugh, mock, ignore. They want miracles, not meaning, comfort, not challenge. He is too early, a man born too soon. This is not mere fiction. Nietzsche knew the pain of the return personally. His books were largely ignored in his lifetime. His radical ideas on morality, religion, truth, and value were either dismissed or misread. He stood alone not just in his room, but in the intellectual life of Europe. To return to the world after solitude, he discovered, is to return with a message few are willing or able to hear. And yet he did not stop writing. He did not retreat permanently. Why? Because solitude is not selfish. For Nietzsche, the highest form of solitude is one that gives rise to creation, and creation demands expression. The philosopher must speak. The artist must share. Even if misunderstood, the creator must return with their gift. This is one of Nietzsche's most paradoxical insights. The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly. The one who dares to be alone, to wrestle with suffering, to shape life into art, must accept alienation as a price. To live truthfully may mean to live tragically, but not in despair. Nietzsche never advocated wallowing in pain or bitterness. His goal was always to affirm life, even when the world seemed unworthy of it. There's a kind of sacred loneliness in this return. The solitary individual carries a vision of what life could be, but must walk among those who are not yet ready to see. There's no arrogance in this, only burden. The burden of one who has seen too much too soon. And yet, Nietzsche urges us not to become bitter prophets or cold elites. He warns against the danger of turning our isolation into superiority. The solitary individual must always resist the temptation to hate the world for not understanding them. Instead, they must laugh. They must dance. They must love fate, amor fati, and speak their truth with the joy of one who has overcome. This is why Zarathustra ends not in triumph, but in a return to silence. He goes back to his solitude, not to escape, but to renew. For Nietzsche, this cycle, solitude, transformation, return, and renewal, is the rhythm of the true individual. To be alone is not a final state. It is a workshop, a furnace. And from it, one emerges with something that must be shared, even if the world isn't ready, even if it never will be. In an age of infinite connection, Nietzsche's fierce defense of solitude feels more radical and more necessary than ever. We carry the crowd in our pockets now. Algorithms anticipate our opinions. Notifications train our attention. Silence is rare. Stillness is suspect. And yet, Nietzsche would not condemn our era. He would challenge us. He would ask, in the midst of all this noise, can you still be alone with yourself? Can you carve out a space to become not what others expect, but what you must become? Let us end this exploration by distilling Nietzsche's philosophy into practical lessons, not rules, for Nietzsche hated dogma, but provocations for your own solitary path. 1. Solitude is not escape, it is engagement. Solitude is not withdrawal from the world out of fear or pain. It is the active choice to confront life more deeply. It is preparation, not evasion. Nietzsche reminds us that true solitude sharpens the soul for meaningful return, not into comfort, but into creation. Ask yourself, am I alone to hide, or am I alone to grow? 2. Create your values, or inherit your chains. Nietzsche warns that if you do not shape your own values, you will live by someone else's. Culture, religion, politics, these all offer ready-made moral codes, but they are often outdated, reactive, or rooted in fear. Solitude gives you the quiet and space needed to examine them honestly and either transform them or reject them. Ask yourself, do I live by my own compass or by inherited maps? 3. Suffering is not the enemy, it is the raw material. Nietzsche does not glorify pain, but he insists we stop avoiding it. In solitude, there is no one to distract us from our wounds, and that is the point. Only by sitting with suffering without flinching can we transform it into insight, into strength, into art. Ask yourself, what have I learned from what hurt me the most? 4. Life is your canvas. Paint it wildly. Nietzsche believed the highest task is to make one's life a work of art. Not perfect, not painless, but radiant with intention. Solitude helps you see your life not as a series of duties, but as an open space for design, style, rhythm, and transformation. Ask yourself, if my life were a novel, would I want to read it? 5. Beware of the comfort that kills. The modern world prizes comfort, convenience, agreement, likes, stability. Nietzsche saw comfort as spiritual anesthesia. It dulls the instincts that lead to creativity and strength. Solitude strips you of that comfort, and in doing so, gives you back your fire. Ask yourself, where am I choosing safety over growth? 6. Return with gifts, not resentment. After solitude, the Nietzschean individual must return not with bitterness, but with gifts. Insight, art, new language, new laughter. The world may not understand. That is not your concern. Your task is to create and to offer. Ask yourself, what truth have I earned in silence that I can now share? Final reflection. Nietzsche's life ended in madness and silence, but his words, born in solitude, outlived him. They continue to disturb, to awaken, to inspire. He was no prophet of despair, but of depth, no nihilist, but a radical affirmationist. He did not seek followers, he sought individuals. To be alone, in Nietzsche's world, is to become an experiment, a dangerous, beautiful one. It is to let go of comfort, face the abyss, suffer consciously, and still say yes to life. Not because life is easy, but because life is yours. Become who you are. Friedrich Nietzsche.